June 6, 1944, Saint-Côme-du-Mont, Normandy. Sergeant Joseph Beyrle slid down the steep roof of the village church and landed hard in the cemetery below. Tracer fire and burning aircraft lit the night sky around him, but he heard no voices, saw no fellow paratroopers, detected no signal flares from his scattered unit. His C-47 transport had taken fire over the Normandy coast just minutes earlier, forcing an emergency jump from 360 feet instead of the standard 1,250 feet used in training. Now, miles behind German lines with no radio contact and no idea where his company had landed, Beyrle faced a situation that would test everything he had learned at Camp Toccoa. What he couldn't know at that moment was that this landing marked the beginning of an extraordinary journey that would take him through 7 German prison camps, 2 escape attempts, Gestapo interrogation, and ultimately to service with the Soviet Red Army as it advanced toward Berlin. He would become the only American soldier known to fight for both the United States and the Soviet Union in World War II. Joseph Beyrle had volunteered for the paratroopers in 1942 after graduating from high school in Muskegon, Michigan, turning down a baseball scholarship to Notre Dame to enlist. His family had survived the Great Depression by standing in government food lines after his father lost his factory job, experiences that shaped his determination and resourcefulness. At Camp Toccoa, Georgia, the training was designed to break men mentally and physically to ensure only the elite remained. Beyrle and the men of the 506th ran the infamous Currahee Mountain, 3 miles up, 3 miles down, daily, forging a physical resilience that went far beyond standard infantry requirements. Colonel Robert Sink, the regimental commander, pushed the unit to read maps, operate enemy weaponry, and survive in isolation. This grueling regime, which saw high washout rates, gave Beyrle the specific survival toolkit he would rely on when the command structure collapsed. He specialized in radio communications and demolitions, earning the nickname Jumpin' Joe for his enthusiasm in volunteering for extra training jumps. After 9 months of preparation, his 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division shipped to England and based at Ramsbury. Before D-Day, Beyrle's specialized skills led to his selection for High-Risk Office of Strategic Services (OSS) support missions. He made 2 covert parachute drops into Nazi-controlled France in April and May 1944 to deliver gold coins to French resistance leaders. These funds were critical for the underground to bribe officials, purchase black market supplies, and fund sabotage operations without leaving a paper trail. Beyrle strapped the gold into a specialized vest worn under his jump jacket, jumping into pitch-black fields, signaled only by a flashlight code from the maquis on the ground. These nighttime insertions required landing alone in enemy territory, making contact with underground networks, and returning to England via covert aircraft pickups, making him one of the first Americans to set foot in Normandy before the main invasion. The massive airborne assault on June 5th and 6th, 1944, involved over 13,000 paratroopers dropping into Normandy ahead of the beach landings to seize key bridges and disrupt German communications. German anti-aircraft fire scattered the formations across a much wider area than planned. After sliding down those slate tiles into the cemetery, Beyrle found himself completely alone in occupied Saint-Côme-du-Mont, with German voices echoing through the village. The isolation was total. He could hear distant gunfire, but had no way to determine where his unit had landed. He heard no assembly signals, saw no friendly forces, and found himself deep in occupied territory with no radio contact. His training emphasized mission accomplishment even when isolated, so Beyrle checked his equipment and decided to proceed with his assigned target, destroying a power station that supplied electricity to German positions defending Utah Beach. The Normandy hedgerows, or bocage, provided both cover and danger. These were not simple manicured bushes, but centuries-old earthen walls tangled with thick roots and vegetation, effectively creating a grid of natural fortresses that limited visibility to just a few meters. Beyrle moved carefully through these barriers, knowing every gap might conceal a German position. He found the power station at dawn, approached from an unexpected angle, placed his demolition charges, and destroyed transformers and switching equipment that would take days to repair. Over the next several days, Beyrle continued operating behind German lines, conducting additional sabotage missions and avoiding capture. He moved primarily at night, sleeping in barns during daylight when German patrols were most active. He destroyed communications lines and equipment using his remaining charges, each sabotage mission increasing the risk of capture as German troops searched for the lone American, causing disruptions in their rear area. The front lines remained fluid and undefined, with resistance pockets scattered across the region, making it nearly impossible to locate friendly forces without without exposing himself. The end came when Beyrle walked directly into a German machine gun position concealed in a hedgerow. Elite Fallschirmjäger paratroopers captured him and marched him to their underground headquarters for interrogation. Sources indicate he was behind enemy lines for approximately 3 days before his capture, though battlefield conditions made exact timekeeping difficult. At the interrogation, a young blonde woman sat on the corner of an officer's desk and began asking questions in perfect English. To Beyrle's astonishment, she mentioned specific details about his unit's base at Ramsbury, naming officers, describing the barracks layout, even knowing the names of local pubs where American soldiers went on leave. She claimed to have danced with many of his fellow soldiers at organized social events. Based on her detailed knowledge and the circumstances, it appears she had been operating as a German intelligence agent in England before the invasion, though the exact nature and extent of her activities remains uncertain. The level of detail she possessed suggests German intelligence had achieved some degree of penetration into Allied security operations. Beyrle gave only his name, rank, and serial number as required by the Geneva Convention, refusing to confirm or deny anything she claimed to know. During his captivity, Beyrle's dog tags were taken, a violation of regulations that would have catastrophic consequences for his family. A German soldier took his identification tags, probably as a war trophy or to trade with others. Such theft was common, despite official prohibitions. Later, when American forces found an unidentifiable body carrying those tags, they assumed it was Beyrle. Based on available evidence, this was most likely a German soldier who had been wearing the stolen tags when he perished. The War Department notified his parents in Muskegon that their son had been lost in action on June 10, 1944. In September of 1944, his family held a full funeral mass at St. Joseph's Catholic Church. They published his obituary in the Muskegon Chronicle. They placed a marker bearing his name in the American cemetery at Sainte-Mère Église, Plot A, Row 2, Grave 48, believing their son's remains lay beneath the White Cross. Beyrle's journey through 7 German prison camps over 7 months took him steadily eastward. At Stalag 13A, he was officially registered as a prisoner and allowed to write a postcard to his parents through the International Red Cross, the first indication they received that their son was alive. Conditions worsened at each camp. Food rations decreased to starvation levels, perhaps 1,000 calories or less daily. Cigarettes became the primary currency among prisoners, traded for scraps of bread or protection. The psychological strain was as dangerous as the physical deprivation. Men who lost hope or refused to eat their meager rations often died within days. Beyrle kept himself mentally sharp by plotting escapes and trading cigarettes he had won in gambling games for extra food. Medical care was virtually non-existent. Diseases spread rapidly through overcrowded, unsanitary barracks. Beyrle witnessed fellow prisoners succumb to malnutrition, dysentery, and pneumonia. His second escape attempt came during a transfer between camps. American fighter bombers strafed their train, and in the chaos, Beyrle and several Americans broke out. They hoped to head east toward Poland, where the Soviet army was approaching, but in confusion, they boarded a train heading west toward Berlin instead, bringing them directly into Nazi Germany's capital, where a German civilian discovered them and turned them over to authorities. The Gestapo took custody, claiming they were American spies rather than legitimate prisoners of war. The Nazi secret police subjected Beyrle to severe interrogation and threatened execution. Wehrmacht officers intervened, arguing the Gestapo had no jurisdiction over POWs and threatening to report the violation. This intervention, motivated by institutional rivalry between Wehrmacht and SS, saved his life. He was transferred to Stalag 13C at Alt-Drowitz in western Poland, approximately 50 miles east of Berlin. Stalag 13C held thousands of Allied prisoners in deteriorating conditions as Germany's military situation collapsed. Soviet forces were pushing westward through Poland, and prisoners could hear the distant thunder of artillery as the Red Army advanced. Beyrle began planning another escape, this time with a clear objective: reach the Soviet lines and persuade them to help him return to Allied forces. In early January of 1945, Beyrle escaped from Stalag 3C and headed east into the frozen Polish countryside. He traveled primarily at night, following the sound of artillery that marked the Soviet advance. For several days, he moved through occupied territory, avoiding German patrols and scavenging food from abandoned farms. The temperature dropped well below freezing, and he suffered from cold and exhaustion as he pushed eastward. In mid-January of 1945, Beyrle encountered a Soviet tank brigade from the 1st Guards Tank Army. He approached with hands raised, holding Lucky Strike cigarettes and shouting, "Amerikansky tovarishch," meaning American comrade. The Soviet soldiers brought him to Captain Alexandra Samusenko, a 22-year-old tank battalion commander who was the only female tank officer of that rank in the entire Soviet military. She had survived Kursk in 1943, where her crew destroyed 3 German Tiger Leopard tanks, earning the Order of the Red Star. According to Beyrle's later accounts, she had experienced devastating personal losses during the German invasion, which appears to have fueled her determination in combat. The battalion's political commissar spoke some English and helped translate as Beyrle explained his situation and offered his demolitions expertise. Samoushenko questioned him carefully, trying to determine if he was a German infiltrator sent to gather intelligence. But Beyrle's knowledge of American military equipment proved crucial. Many Soviet units were operating Lend-Lease equipment, including American Sherman tanks and trucks, but they often lacked the technical manuals or expertise to maintain them optimally. Beyrle demonstrated he could start and operate the American engines, proving his identity beyond doubt. Against regulations, Samoushenko agreed to let him join her battalion as it advanced toward Berlin. For approximately 1 month, Beyrle fought alongside Soviet tank crews in a role known as tankodesantniki, infantry who rode directly on the exterior of tanks to provide immediate protection and assault capability. It was a dangerous position with a high casualty rate, exposing soldiers to shrapnel and small arms fire. Beyrle put his Toccoa demolitions training to use in ways his American instructors never imagined. He rode on the back of Samoushenko's Sherman command tank, jumping off to clear minefields, blow up anti-tank obstacles, and destroy German strongpoints that were holding up the column. The Soviet style of warfare was distinct from the American approach. It was more fluid, brutal, and reliant on overwhelming momentum. The Red Army soldiers, impressed by the Americans' courage and his endless supply of lucky strikes, accepted him as one of their own, sharing their vodka and rations. In late January of 1945, Samoushenko's battalion liberated Stalag 3rd C, the same camp from which Beyrle had escaped weeks earlier. He walked through the gates as a liberator, seeing his former fellow prisoners still held in the deteriorating facility. The Soviet troops provided food and medical care to the starving inmates. Beyrle helped coordinate the liberation, using his English to communicate with Allied prisoners. Beyrle's service with the Red Army ended in early February when German Stuka dive bombers attacked the Soviet column. The Luftwaffe used its remaining Stukas for ground attack missions against Soviet armor advancing toward Berlin. Beyrle suffered serious wounds from bomb fragments and was evacuated to a Soviet hospital in Landsberg an der Warthe. His injuries were severe enough to end his combat service permanently. Just weeks later, Captain Samoushenko perished during the East Pomeranian offensive in March of 1945. According to accounts from the period, she was caught beneath tank treads moving in darkness, one of the countless tragedies of the war's final months. The journey to Moscow took Beyrle through Warsaw, which had been reduced to rubble during the brutal suppression of the Warsaw Uprising in 1944. German forces had systematically destroyed the Polish capital in retaliation, and the devastation shocked even soldiers who had seen years of combat. The city was little more than smoking ruins and collapsed buildings, with survivors picking through debris looking for anything salvageable. A Polish nurse at a convent treated Beyrle's infected wounds and provided him with hot food and rest before he continued eastward. He crossed the Vistula River on a pontoon bridge erected by Soviet engineers and eventually boarded a Soviet hospital train that took him to the outskirts of Moscow. Arriving at the American embassy in Moscow in February 1945, Beyrle expected a warm welcome and rapid repatriation. Instead, he discovered that according to official records, Sergeant Joseph R. Beyrle had been declared lost in action on June 10, 1944, in France. A funeral mass had been held in his honor in Muskegon. His obituary had been published in the local newspaper. His grave was marked in an American military cemetery in Normandy. Embassy officials, confronted with a man claiming to be someone who had been dead for 8 months, didn't know what to make of him. The atmosphere was tense. The Soviets had occasionally tried to infiltrate spies into Western channels using the identities of dead soldiers. The detention that followed frustrated Beyrle immensely after everything he had survived. Embassy officers placed him under Marine Guard in the Metropole Hotel, a grand building in central Moscow, until his identity could be verified through official channels. He spent his nights talking with the Marine Guards assigned to watch him, trying to convince them of his identity and sharing stories of his experiences. The guards were skeptical at first, finding it hard to believe anyone could have survived such an improbable series of events. On one occasion, driven by desperation and feeling like a prisoner again after all he had endured, Beyrle attempted to overpower his guard, but the Marine quickly subdued him in a brief scuffle. The major in charge of security ordered Beyrle to make no further escape attempts and assured him that fingerprint verification was underway. The process took days as communications traveled between Moscow, Washington, and military record centers, coordinating across wartime communication systems that were often unreliable. Eventually, the fingerprints matched and the impossible became confirmed. Joseph Beyrle was alive. Ambassador Averell Harriman and General John Dean interviewed Beyrle after his identity was established, debriefing him on his experiences behind German lines and with Soviet forces. His story provided valuable intelligence on German POW camp conditions, Soviet military capabilities, and the situation in occupied Poland at a critical moment in the war. Beyrle was one of approximately 10 to 15 Americans who had collected in Moscow for various reasons, including war correspondents, officers, and other personnel making their way back to American control through the Soviet Union. The group was flown to Odessa on the Black Sea, then traveled by ship to Istanbul, Turkey, and on to Port Said, Egypt, before reaching Naples, Italy, and finally being transported back to the United States. The circuitous route took weeks, but it brought Beyrle back to American soil. On April 21, 1945, Joseph Beyrle returned to Muskegon, Michigan, walking into his family home to the astonishment of parents who had mourned him for months. The reunion was emotional and overwhelming, as his family struggled to process that their son was actually alive after having accepted his passing and held his funeral. 2 weeks later, on May 8, 1945, Beyrle celebrated Victory in Europe Day in Chicago, joining massive crowds celebrating the end of the war against Germany. The timing was extraordinary, as he had returned just in time to witness the culmination of the conflict he had fought in from its earliest moments on D-Day. In 1946, Beyrle married his girlfriend, Joanne Hollowell, in St. Joseph's Catholic Church in Muskegon, the same church where his funeral mass had been held 2 years earlier. The same priest who had conducted that memorial service now performed his wedding ceremony, an unusual situation that captured the extraordinary nature of Beyrle's wartime experience. The couple's marriage lasted until his passing nearly 60 years later, and they raised 3 children together. Beyrle worked for Brunswick Corporation for 28 years after the war, retiring as a shipping supervisor. The company, which manufactured bowling equipment and marine products, provided stable employment that allowed him to build a normal life after his extraordinary wartime experiences. He and Joanne had 3 children, including a daughter, Julie, and 2 sons. His son, Joe Beyrle II, followed his father's example by serving with the 101st Airborne Division during the Vietnam War, continuing the family's military tradition. His other son, John Beyrle, pursued a career in foreign service and eventually became United States Ambassador to Russia from 2008 to 2012, a position that connected directly to his father's unique wartime experience, serving with both American and Soviet forces. John's appointment was particularly meaningful given his father's history, and he attended exhibitions in Moscow honoring Joseph Beyrle's service during his tenure as ambassador. Recognition of Beyrle's extraordinary service came gradually over the decades following the war. For many years, his story was known primarily to his family and fellow veterans, as the Cold War made his service with Soviet forces politically complicated to discuss publicly. In 1994, President Bill Clinton and Russian President Boris Yeltsin held a ceremony at the White House to mark the 50th anniversary of D-Day, bringing together American and Soviet veterans of World War II in a symbolic gesture of reconciliation. Joseph Beyrle attended wearing medals from both nations, the only veteran present who had fought in combat for both countries. His unique status symbolized the wartime alliance between the United States and Soviet Union, even as Cold War tensions had dominated the intervening decades. In 2004, Russian Lieutenant General Mikhail Kalashnikov, the famous designer of the AK-47 rifle, presented Beyrle with one of his weapons at a Moscow Victory Day celebration, a gesture honoring the American service alongside Soviet forces. Later that year, while visiting Toccoa to speak to students about his experiences, Joseph Beyrle passed away in his sleep from heart failure at age 81. His burial at Arlington National Cemetery in April of 2005 marked his 3rd funeral, as his family noted. He was laid to rest with full military honors, the only American buried there, wearing both United States and Soviet decorations, embodying the alliance that ultimately defeated Nazi Germany.